Hey, thanks everyone for joining. Just wanted to start it out by giving a quick overview of Intellias for those of you who may not have heard of us before, or maybe have worked with us on our software side of things and maybe a few new things to find out about us. So we are headquartered in Dallas, Texas, and also have an office in Chicago. We've been in the space since 1999, and recently, within the past 10 years or so, obtained our Infor Alliance partnership. So what that means is in addition to the software, bolt-on software that Intellias has traditionally offered for the Infor products, we have a fully certified team of consultants, both on the functional and technical side, to support upgrades, application consulting, cloud services, and we still have various software offerings as well for both Lawson and CloudSuite. So a full array of services and software for anything that you might need. Try to keep it kind of short and sweet with this one. I've given this some iteration of this presentation now, maybe 3 times. The general theme and topic is always the same, but the content changes a little bit, obviously with the calendar and with some of the recent updates that Infor has put out within their compatibility matrix. So we'll cover a little bit about what's new or what's important, the key points and takeaways for that, and then open it up to Q&A. Happy to answer any questions or listen to any comments. Primarily, the contents of this webinar is going to be geared towards the on-premise customer base. I think a lot of these things do apply to single tenant. The difference would be that, Infor is kind of pushing you along or managing a lot of these updates that may be required, whereas the on-premise, the call to action, is on your own doing, and so you're going to have to plan for these, budget for these, and implement them within your environments. Still, I think the most important key update to talk through is the Windows Server 2019. We've been doing these upgrades for over a year now, I would say, 1.5 years maybe. Customers have started to upgrade, but the big thing there is Microsoft is dropping support for the 2012 R2 operating system. And for most customers who are on version 10, if you haven't already done an operating system upgrade, there's a really good chance that you're on Windows Server 2012 R2, and that becomes end of life in October of this year. So even if you're on iSeries, or even if you're on AIX or Linux or any of these other platforms for your core application server, the reality is there's probably some other Windows component within your environment, and that's likely going to be impacted by this end of support date coming from Microsoft. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means from the Microsoft perspective and kind of Infor's take on it as well, and kind of the direction that they're giving customers. With that, both the SQL Server and Oracle compatibility is updated. And then some of the changes to Java, I get questions probably on a monthly basis from customers asking about, well, can I move to this version of Java or that version of Java or OpenJDK or whatever it might be? We'll talk about the different versions of Java compatibility that are available to you within the environment if you're not interested in moving forward with Oracle Java 8. And then there's also some updated ADFS support. Another big question I get from customers is there's some that still haven't implemented ADFS. That was a directive from Infor back in 2019 to move to ADFS. And at this point, a lot of customers are interested in moving away. Maybe they went to ADFS, but they're interested now in moving to Azure or Okta or some other more modern cloud-based identity provider. Talk through some of those options. I'd like to start it off just with some of the key dates. At this point, most of them are already in the red, and some of these are pretty old, but I chose to leave them on this iteration of the presentation because we still have a number of customers that are still running some of this older versions of the operating system and database. So the most important one really is the Windows Server 2012 R2. That's coming in October. And if you haven't already planned to upgrade that, I think it's very important. There's a call to action soon to have some sort of plan in place for it. The SharePoint 2013, that's the kind of the framework. If you're still running Mingle Foundation or Mingle 11, that product went end of life over a year ago, I think, but that's the kind of the framework for that platform, and that's end of life. SQL Server compatibility, if you're still on 2014, that's nearing end of life. The recommendation would be to upgrade to 2019 at this point. And then same thing on the Oracle side of things. If you haven't already made the move to 19C, that would be what you should be looking to do. So on the operating system, moving to 2019. On the SharePoint side of things, we wouldn't be upgrading SharePoint, and we'll talk about the application versions in a second, but really for Mingle Foundation or Mingle version 11, that product you got when you upgraded to version 10, it does run on SharePoint. To upgrade that product to move to Infor OS would be the move, kind of Mingle 12, but that platform, Infor OS, does not have a SharePoint dependency. So there's really no SharePoint upgrade. It's more of an elimination of SharePoint within the environment. And then on the relational database side of things, moving either to SQL 2019 or Oracle 19C. And at this point, I also get a lot of questions from customers. Well, what about Windows Server 2022 or higher versions of SQL or higher versions of Oracle? At this point, per the compatibility matrix with Infor, there's two ways you need to look at this, or two different lenses you need to look through of, well, what does Microsoft support and what does Infor support? And kind of have to meet in the middle on those two things. On the software side of things, if you haven't already moved to ADFS, that's something that should be done immediately and or as part of an upgrade to the operating system. The Internet Explorer 11 end of support. I don't think a lot of customers are still dependent on that, but Infor announced that a while back. We talked about the Mingle 11 product that was end of support back actually in 2021. So the move there would be to upgrade to Infor OS if you choose to carry that product forward. And with that comes the Silverlight dependency. So Mingle 11 and Silverlight have codependencies together. Both of those would be remediated by upgrading to Infor OS. On the Oracle or the Java side of things, so currently Infor only supports two versions of Java, well, two vendors for Java really, Oracle or Amazon. Amazon has an open source version of Java called Corretto. So I get that question a lot. Can we move to JDK 11? Can we move to OpenJDK? Can we move? And the answer is no. You have two options at this point: Oracle JDK 8 or Corretto JDK 8. That's it. So those are your only two options. So if you're still on Oracle Java 7 or you've moved to Oracle Java 8 and you're interested in an open source alternative, because Oracle started charging license fees for Java a couple years ago. So to eliminate that and move to open source, you'd be looking towards a Corretto, Amazon Corretto, JDK 8. On the Crystal server side of things, that would be if you're using LBI. So at the end of last year, SAP dropped support for Crystal Server 2016. So if you still have the LBI in your environment and you're still using Crystal Server 2016, that was actually end of life at the end of last year, and you'd be looking to move up to Crystal Server 2020. And then the other really important one to call out would just be the Lawson platform itself. I think most people know by now, when I started giving this presentation, there wasn't a whole lot of awareness of the end of support. Previously the date was April of 2026, and Infor has since extended that to the end of 2030. So just calling that out here because it's an important item to understand. A lot of these upgrades we're talking about within the environment require substantial investment, both time and money. And so understanding at this point, I wouldn't say that many of them are optional. It's not like we can say, oh, we don't want to upgrade our operating system. We're going to upgrade to CloudSuite, or we're going to move to this ERP. There's not enough time to do that. So you're going to have to make the investment by understanding how much longer you're going to continue to run Lawson on premise and how can you best set up your environment for success. So quite a bit of runway left on that, 7 years or whatever. But the new date that they've called out is December 2030. I think this is a good point if you haven't already to start to develop a strategy and a roadmap for your environment. Really, this is something that should have been done 1 to 2 years ago, in my opinion, when I first gave this presentation, kind of road mapping out and stepping into these upgrades versus kind of having to take them all at once. But even still looking forward with what you're planning to do with your ERP, what kind of investments need to be made now to run it with minimal overhead and effort for the next 3 to 5 years? What versions do you want to be on? How much longer are you going to be on them? If and when you're going to move to CloudSuite or any other ERP. I think going through and building some sort of roadmap to understand where things stand is really beneficial. Long term, to understand what kind of investment is required in the system. I also think it's important. A lot of customers will come to me and say, "Well, we're in the middle of upgrading to CloudSuite, or we're in the middle of going to Workday, or we're going to be live on Workday April of next year." The reality is, technically, it doesn't matter. The date is October 2023. So even in theory, if you were going live with CloudSuite or another system and you were going to be no longer using your on-premise Lawson environment in November of 2023, technically you're out of support at that point in time. So there's some options for that we'll kind of talk through, but it doesn't really matter if you've already committed to upgrading or to moving. If you're still going to be running this Lawson environment on premise in any capacity after October, really you should be upgrading the operating system to make sure you're compliant both from a Microsoft perspective and from an Infor perspective. We'll talk about that more in a second. Another thing to call out, just because I'm not sure, a lot of customers are aware of it, and I think these things start to snowball a bit, is some of these upgrades at this point, if you haven't made any sort of investment in maintaining your Lawson system, taking any sort of patches, this operating system upgrade is going to be a massive, massive change. So I would say that understanding the general product life cycle and putting your system on some sort of regular cadence of patches is just a good thing to do for the health of your system and to help remediate or eliminate the large jumps that are required to move when and if you have an issue with the system. So for example, if you hadn't upgraded your Lawson system foundation or taken a MSP in 6 years, and all of a sudden you can't process a payroll, and Infor tells you need to take a CTP, if you haven't been keeping up with routine maintenance, you have a critical payroll issue, you have to take a patch, the chances are that that CTP would introduce massive amounts of changes without giving you little time to test, are pretty high. So I do think that coming up with either annually or biannually some sort of cadence to update both your environment versions and your application versions of the product to keep them compliant with the product lifecycle is a good thing to do. And so this product lifecycle policy, including the statement of direction with the 2030 date and all those things, are available in knowledge base article, which is, we'll send out a copy of the presentation, but the KB article is listed at the bottom of this. But in general, there's kind of this N-2 policy. So if the version of your environment is on 10.0.11 right now, that's the latest release, Infor's committing to supporting up to 2 versions back for priority 1 updates. So I always encourage my customers to be within 2 releases of whatever's current. So if you're on 0.11 now, 10 and 9 would be within N-2. If you're on 0.8, that would be concerning. I would want to be at least at 9 or above. And so trying to keep up with these on an annual basis so that you're within this range is always a good thing. Another example of when this caused a lot of issues for our customers was 2 winters ago with the Log4j vulnerabilities. Everyone was scrambling to put in patches to fix the system. That's another example where customers who are already pretty close to the latest release, it's relatively painless to put in those patches to fix the vulnerabilities. Our customers who were ways and ways back and hadn't upgraded Java or hadn't upgraded WebSphere or hadn't upgraded LSF in some time, all of a sudden they were looking at pretty large, kind of substantial projects to get upgrades in place just to remediate a very critical but kind of small vulnerability. So understanding this policy, this lifecycle policy, reviewing the knowledge base article, I think is really important. And also understanding that the LSF and Landmark environments themselves may have dependencies on some different third-party products. So I mentioned Java, mentioned WebSphere, the Micro Focus COBOL compiler, Perl, all these types of things. So as you're upgrading your system, make sure you're reviewing that compatibility matrix to understand that, oh, a great example on the Landmark side would be with Oracle 19c compatibility. Oh, we want to upgrade our database. All right, well, you need to be on this version of Landmark, this version of Grid, this version of Java, so on and so forth. So really making sure you go through and vet that compatibility matrix to make sure that with whatever you're updating with the Infor patches, you're also updating any applicable third-party products and keeping those in line with Infor's compatibility matrix. I just went ahead and copy pasted this KB article out of Infor's support site. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but almost on a weekly basis, I get questions from customers who are in this kind of gray area of we haven't upgraded our operating, we run Windows, we're on 2012 R2, we haven't upgraded it yet for whatever reason. And usually the reason is, well, we already have extended support from Microsoft. I heard that comment the other day. Well, we run it in Azure. In Azure, we get an extra 3 years, so we're covered. Or more often, I have customers who say, we're in the middle of upgrading and we're going to be live on this other system, or we're going to be live on CloudSuite. If everything goes right, we're going to be live in Q2 of 2024. So we really don't want to invest all of this money and also divert all of our resources from a business user perspective for testing just to upgrade the operating system of our old ERP. I understand both of those things, but I do think it's important to read through this knowledge base article to understand that basically Infor is telling you, we don't care if you have extended support from Microsoft. We are not certifying or supporting our products for 2012 R2. There's no warranty whatsoever. So if something breaks, they even go as far as to say the year-end patching, it's going to be 2019 compatible. If it doesn't run for 2012 R2, you're kind of out of luck. And in my opinion, that's a terrible position to be in, because if you find yourself needing to take some sort of patch or there's some sort of critical issue, this type of upgrade is usually not something that you can just do in even a week. We'll go through a sample timeline for these types of projects, but it could be almost impossible to upgrade your operating system in a efficient way with even a month of time. So these are large projects and you don't want to be kind of caught on your heels trying to figure out how to solve an issue when Infor's made it very clear that they're not supporting 2012 R2, regardless of what your status is with Microsoft. So I think it's kind of a risky proposition to remain on the 2012 R2 operating system. But some customers choose to do it. And I do understand that, where particularly if you're planning to move off the platform, I think in my personal opinion, if it's going to be a short window, a 3 to 6 month window, either you're trying to buy a little bit more time to get the operating system upgraded, or you're going to be leaving the Lawson platform behind, I think it may be okay to extend the support for that tiny window. But if it's going to be any longer than that, I think there's just too much opportunity for risk, particularly as the rest of the world kind of looks, not just Infor, but Oracle, IBM, Micro Focus, all of these other vendors stop supporting 2012 R2. So they don't really care that you're getting security patches from Microsoft. They're not certifying their products for it anymore. And so you could find yourself there, even with BSI, that, well, you need to be on 2019 to take this patch or to put in this fix. So they mention and call out some of the risks here, and I think they're kind of self-explanatory, but basically there is risk with remaining, and Infor's strongly encouraging customers to move and upgrade to the 2019 operating system. And again, this would apply if your application server is AIX or it's Linux or it's iSeries, you know, you still likely, if you have LBI, if you have Smart Office, if you have ADFS, um, even most customers with Landmark are on Windows, you know, all of those servers are impacted by this. It's not just Lawson. So how do we go about doing a server upgrade? There's really two methodologies to this, a side-by-side upgrade versus an in-place upgrade. So the side-by-side upgrade has a star next to it. That's our preferred method. Um, Basically, with that approach, we are building out completely independent infrastructure, installing the system into that, brand new servers, and copying all of your data over. So the new servers that you will be live on are in silos, completely segregated from your current environment. That allows clean, dedicated build out, isolated testing on new infrastructure, and a really clean rollback if there's any issues that go live because we haven't touched anything on your current system. So the benefits there are the simple rollback strategy, the parallel testing capabilities. So, hey, you want to run test cases on your new production system. Well, we can do that because it's not live yet. It's sitting here on this server that we're going to switch over to at a later point in time. But obviously the downsides are it takes more time, cost to deploy. Doing an in-place upgrade, basically you leave everything where it is and you just go through the Microsoft in-place upgrade process to upgrade the operating system on your existing servers. The benefit here is it's much faster and cheaper to deploy. However, there's a very complex rollback strategy because if that were to go wrong and you went live for 6 hours, 24 hours, whatever that is, you really can't come back from that. And there's almost no ability to do any sort of testing on your production environment because you kind of get a one-shot upgrade at it and you're live and that's it. You're kind of doing live testing in production. Really, that's the biggest drawback to me. In addition to understanding that Infor's recommendation is to go with generally the side-by-side approach. And there's a lot of other dependencies that will need to be looked at. So yes, Windows and Microsoft can be upgraded in place, but then how are we going to upgrade all of the other components on top of it? And what's the order of that? So it can become a little bit complex as those were all designed to be installed onto a clean operating system in the first place. So like I had said, the side-by-side upgrades are recommended. What's an average project timeline? Really varies. At this point, time is not a luxury for most, but we've done these as fast as 2 months, really as fast as a month and a half, I would say, and as long as 12 plus months. And the variability there is not so much in complications or issues or anything like that. It was that because we did these side-by-side upgrades, our team would come in, build out the servers, and then they sit there because we're waiting for business user availability to come in and do the regression testing. So it's basically like a pause in the middle of the project where then the business comes back when they have free time 6 months later, and that blows out the timeline by, 6 to 7 months or whatever it is. So the fastest we can do them is usually 1.5 to 2 months. Generally, it's 3 on average from start to finish, but it can be longer than that depending on how long it takes to get testing coordinated and things like that. The average project cost here, the 100 to 200,000, this is highly variable. That would include things not just like professional services to bring in a firm such as Intellias to do the installations, but also your internal resource costs, licensing costs from Microsoft, from Oracle to procure the operating system licenses or the database licenses, the hardware that you may need to provision, all those types of things. So all in, the COBOL compiler is another big one that's coming back to bite people as well. You have to relicense Micro Focus. So all of that could actually push it even higher than 200 grand. And what's in the typical project scope, provisioning the new hardware and infrastructure, doing brand new installations of each of your environments, kind of mirror images of them on the new operating systems, and then running through subsequent data migrations. If you've gone through or have sat through the version 9 to version 10 Lawson upgrade, this is very similar in terms of how the project's structured. The biggest difference is we're not actually upgrading the data. With the 9 to 10, we had to run everything through those UG programs and actually do a full data upgrade pass. In this process, we're just migrating the data for the most part. But full user testing cycles are extremely important. If you think about what's happening with the side-by-side upgrade, it's as if, you're moving in your house and we're building an identical house next to your other one. And we have to take everything out of your old house and move it into the new. And it needs to be exactly where it was in the old house. And we can do that, and we're very successful with it. It doesn't just include the application database tables. That includes the users, the job definitions, the print files, the work files, the interfaces, the connection points, the reports, everything needs to be migrated. And because it's all moving, really nothing should change, but fairly extensive testing is required to validate that that's the case or prove that that's the case. So here's a sample timeline, again, within that kind of 3-month window, showing that really up front, we call it our design, but really this is when our installers will come in and build out the environments, work with the infrastructure teams to provision the servers, install the Infor products onto them, and then the subsequent data migration passes are done throughout the project. The testing piece here is just as involved as the build. Again, that extensive regression testing process is required. And then deploying, this is what can be highly variable, because once we get through this, we can put in pauses kind of in between the orange, yellow, and the green. Again, at this point, we don't have a whole lot of time. We're sitting here in June, the end of life is in October. So for my customers that did these projects 18 months ago, they had the luxury of time. We took our own slow pace through this, gave the business users 6 months to go through their testing, very comfortable. At this point, if you haven't started this project, you don't really have that luxury. But they are 3 kind of separate linear cycles. The deployment with a side-by-side upgrade is relatively fast because we've built out all the installations and done the upgrades. At the cutover, really we're just doing one final migration pass. So the outage window required there is limited, 4 to 8 hours, for example. Maybe even less, depending on whether or not an MSP is applied as part of the project. The biggest things to consider with that are going to be the number of environments. So I have customers with 1 environment. I have customers with, I think the most is 6. The number of environments you have is an absolute X factor. 2 is twice as hard as 1. 3 is 3 times as hard as 1. It's just going to add to the cost and complexity. So if you have 5 environments or something like that, this would be a good idea to maybe consolidate. Do you still need 5? Because that will drive the cost, that will drive the timeline. The business value versus the compliance. A lot of customers say, all right, I need to give the business a win. I got to tell them what they're going to get from this. Unfortunately, the answer is not a whole lot. I compare this type of upgrade to getting an oil change in your car. You go and get an oil change, the car drives the same way, generally speaking, as it did before you went into the shop. You're going to kind of find the same thing here. This is a compliance thing with Microsoft, with Infor, their compatibility matrix and end-of-life support policies. We're changing things under the hood, but the general application itself, not a whole lot of things happening there. So from a business value perspective, there's almost nothing for the business users in terms of enhancements, features, usability. For the most part, this is more of a compliance thing. And make sure you take into consideration the non-Infor licensing costs. So we talked about how much does this cost me? Well, there's going to be professional services or consulting fees generally to install the environments. There's going to be licensing fees for software from generally Infor is not going to hit you on the software licensing again, but you will have to relicense the new COBOL compiler through them for Micro Focus. That's going to carry a cost. And then anything within Microsoft Oracle for your operating systems, your database platforms, any hardware you might need to procure. Obviously, there's costs with that. So think through all of those things. And then your internal resource cost. And you're going to have to staff up a project team for these initiatives, and how many people are you going to need, and what type of time commitment are they going to have? One of the things we're encouraging customers to think about through this is their readiness for CloudSuite. Depending on how you approach this upgrade, there are things that can be kind of net positive moves towards CloudSuite or version 11. And so taking advantage of this, if you want to kind of ready the organization or expose them to things that are going to be, I don't want to say they are parts of CloudSuite, but they are things that introduce the look and feel or some of the capabilities, some of the technologies of CloudSuite into your on-premise environment. So looking at some of those things and also taking this as an opportunity to potentially ready yourself for a CloudSuite move. So with that, the two biggest ones on this list, I would say, are the Infor OS Portal 10.1. Why? That's going to move away from the stark white Lawson V10 user experience that everyone had when they upgraded into more of the Infor has a lot of different names for it, but Soho 4.0, XI, hook and loop, whatever you want to call it, the responsive design. Eliminate Smart Office, implement the new look and feel with Infor OS, and that's going to modernize the Lawson platform to look a lot more like CloudSuite will. So it helps with that transition potentially, brings in a lot of different features that you might see within CloudSuite. Same thing within the Landmark 11 platform. If you're on Lawson version 10, you can run Landmark 11 on premise. So that's bringing the updated version of IPA, some of the capabilities of that technology platform, which is the underlying tech platform that runs a lot of the CloudSuite applications. Evaluation of burst, that's something that could be considered. There are integrations that could be had with version 10, different reports and dashboards that can be built out. That is the primary BI tool within CloudSuite and something that will come with your base subscription, if and when you choose to upgrade. So that's an opportunity to start to familiarize the organization with those new tools while you're still on your current system. And then this RICE analysis, I'm a technology consultant. I'm always on the tech side of things. The RICE stands for the reports, interfaces, conversions, and extensions. All of these things are going to have to be reviewed and evaluated as part of an operating system upgrade. They're either going to have to be migrated, tested, replatformed, whatever it is. Keep an inventory of those things, because when and if you move to CloudSuite or another ERP, we need that list. That's the first thing I come to. How many reports do you have? How many interfaces do you have? Which ones are we going to carry forward? What technology are we going to use? So use this as an opportunity to start collecting that documentation to get your ducks in a row. In terms of the next steps, we talked about some of the road mapping items, considerations, and things like that with compatibility. But also, we'd always be happy to schedule a meeting so you can discuss with me or any of our other experts, to talk through some of your organization specific needs. I know that some of the content of this is somewhat generalized and everyone's a little bit unique in terms of their deployment, the versions they're on, the types of operating systems, how things are made up. And the compatibility matrix is a great document. It's a very important document, also a very confusing document. So we find that it helps with a lot of customers to get on a call and kind of talk through it and build up a custom tailored roadmap for them to figure out how we can help make their project a success. With that, we'll open it up to questions. I see a number of them are already in the chat, so I can go through those. The last one, actually, I do want to cover. Someone had asked if Okta is an option for Infor OS. Can we map the Okta authentication to sign on based on existing SSLP? So I do want to talk about this one because I get a question about it almost on a weekly basis. The official stance from Lawson for authentication is that LS is STS, which is the old LDAP bind. That's no longer a thing. You should not be using that. So where do we go? You have two options. You can integrate directly with Microsoft ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services, of which Infor supports all the way up to version 5, which is 2019. They also support 2016 version 4 and 2012 R2 version 3. So you have ADFS support and compatibility across the board. The other option is to use what's called Infor STS. And Infor STS is a feature of the Infor OS technology platform. So Infor OS, again, That is the replacement for Mingle 11. It's a completely different platform. It does everything that Mingle 11 did and a whole lot more, but it is the replacement for all intents and purposes. So Infor OS, aka Mingle 12, has a feature in it called Infor STS. That is the only other option for authentication as opposed to just ADFS. What Infor STS allows you to do then is connect and integrate your system with other SAML2 identity providers. So the customers who come to me and say, I want to use Azure AD, I want to use Okta, I want to use Ping Federate. We've done all of these things for customers. However, it is by way of Infor STS. So if you want to use any of those identity providers, or really, we've used a whole different other SAML2 IDPs that I never even heard of before. Really, most SAML2 compliant IDPs can be integrated with Infor STS and thus can be used with your on-premise Lawson system. That's all supported, out of the box functionality. It's things that we've helped customers configure. The biggest catch with that is that it absolutely requires Infor OS. So you have to have the new Mingle or whatever you want to call it within the environment. And generally speaking, Infor STS is a reserved licensed component. So you'll need to work with the Infor account executive on this piece. I mentioned that these upgrades don't require any additional license fees directly from Infor. You may need to repurchase the COBOL compiler. If you want to go with Infor STS, that's an exception because there's two licensing tiers of Infor OS. There's a light version and a full version. Generally speaking, customers are entitled to the light version for a $0 license swap based on their existing SKUs they've purchased. The full version is an upcharge, and the full version is what gives you Infor STS. So if you're interested in moving away from ADFS and to Infor STS so that you can integrate with Azure or Okta or whatever identity provider you want, you will need to work with your account executive to see what the licensing looks like for the Infor OS full product. Going back to the questions here, we are running LSF on Unix. Can an in-place upgrade of Windows Server to 2012 or 2 to 2019 be done? Can it be done? Technically speaking, yes. I'm never going to recommend in-place upgrades to customers. We generally don't do them. And most customers that I've spoken to, even their infrastructure teams and server teams don't want to support the in-place upgrade. So I'm not going to recommend it. I really haven't seen Infor recommend it. And I haven't seen a whole lot of server administrators with the customer sites recommend it. So technically speaking, yes, these in-place upgrades can likely be done, but we had talked about the risk and exposure to those things, whereas there's basically no testing. So if you're okay with no testing and complicated rollback strategies, then I think the in-place upgrade could work. And there's snapshots and there's things like that to mitigate it, but I'm not sure it's worth the effort. I think the better approach is to do it the right way through a side-by-side upgrade, be able to test, validate, and cleanly switch over to the new environment. Do we have to upgrade to, sorry, I'm rolling into the next questions here. Do we have to upgrade to Landmark 11 if we were to upgrade the operating system to 2019? I want to say yes. I actually pulled up the compatibility matrix because I figured, I assume this question, and if you don't know how to, I actually had a customer tell me last week they didn't know how to find the compatibility matrix. So I did want to show people that. And unfortunately, Infor changed this whole concierge thing on me. But if you've logged into the new support site, concierge, whatever they're calling it, you come in here and you can go into this support portal under this application. And there may be other ways to get to this. This is just how I do it. Once you're in the support portal under search, you go to browse documentation. And then under browse documentation, I see a lot of products here because of the Intellias account I'm under, but you'll probably see less potentially. You'll have one for Lawson. And if you don't expand the tree, just click on Lawson, and then there's this compatibility matrix. And then this pulls it up. So I assume this question is coming from somebody who's on Landmark 10. And they're wanting to upgrade the operating, and 2012 R2, they're wanting to upgrade the operating system, but they are not wanting to upgrade Landmark. And it does, so on the compatibility matrix, I'm looking at Landmark version 11. This customer would be on, if I'm assuming correctly, they would be on Landmark 10.1.1. And so we can see here from an operating system perspective that that is not supported. So the answer to that question is no. If you choose to upgrade the operating system in 2012 R2, 2019, you must upgrade to Landmark 11. And then the follow-up to that question is, does it require the ion grid installation? Also, yes, it does. The version of the grid used with Landmark changed between version 10 and version 11, and version 11 requires the ion grid. And there's a supported upgrade path there from 10 to 11, but you would need the ion grid. There's another question. Do we have the option for in-place conversion? Meaning, can we just upgrade the operating system and make required changes to the LSF environment? Again, I kind of answered that question before. Technically, yes, that's an option. It's not one I would ever recommend. I think the side-by-side upgrade is the best approach. And the reason for that was outlined here under the kind of pros and cons matrix. You have basically no ability to test, and there's a very complex rollback strategy. And then there's the dependencies there between figuring out how to do the Microsoft supported in place upgrade and then what needs to be upgraded from an Infor perspective. So actually the last question is a perfect example. Okay, we're on Landmark 10.1.1 on 2012 R2. We're going to upgrade the operating system to 2019. That may go perfectly smoothly. However, we just found out that Landmark 10 is not supported on 2019. So now you need to upgrade Landmark. Is running Landmark 10.1.1 supported on 2019? No. So is the upgrade program going to work? I don't know. It might not. If it doesn't, is Infor going to support you? No. To me, that's also a very lengthy cutover. So you're going to have to do that now. That might take 3 or 4 days, depending on how many applications, how many environments you have, to do an in-place upgrade like that. The next question is, if we are in Mingle, does it require us to install Infor OS? Can this be done without ADFS? I think that question's saying if we are not using Mingle, do we have to install Infor OS? I get that question a lot. I think officially, Infor is still saying that the only supported way to run the Lawson core forms is inside of Mingle. The reality is a lot of customers don't do that, and things technically seem to work okay. So, by the book, really, the Infor OS or Mingle component should be part of your architecture. But you can kind of mirror, I think, whatever you have in your current environment. If you're not using Mingle today, you could probably get away without using Infor OS in the future. But yeah, you would still need to use ADFS for your authentication. Somebody else said, we do not have ADFS and Infor OS. Is Windows 2019 upgraded for required? Does it require Infor OS? So Infor OS is really only required if you're choosing to upgrade Mingle. If you do not have ADFS, that's a different discussion because, as I had stated earlier, LS is STS, which is the old LDAP bind way of authenticating with a little Infor red square, was sunset in March of 2019. What that means is you either need to be using ADFS for authentication or you need to be using the Infor STS or Infor OS authentication, which integrates with Azure, Okta, other SAML2 IDP. So if you're not using ADFS, that's a whole nother issue. But really, the 2019 OS upgrade applies to any Windows server in your environment. I used ADFS as an example. It could be Smart Office, it could be MSCM, it could be Landmark, it could be anything. But what I find typically is customers who have iSeries or who run AIX or run Red Hat, they almost all have some Windows component within their environment. Someone asked generally, what is the cost for the MF compiler license fee? I can't really answer that other than to tell you all the ones I've seen are 5 figures. So that's something you have to work with your Infor account executive on. And in all fairness to them, this is not something that Infor is, making a buck on. They're kind of passing through to you. All of these licensing requirements and costs come from Micro Focus, but you will procure the license from Infor, and there will be a relatively substantial cost for doing so. The next question is, if we are still on 2012, our servers at year end, will the payroll year end patches work on our environment? Is there a risk that we may run into issues applying these patches and then be stuck, unable to process year end items? That's really a question better suited for Infor, but I would say this KB article I pulled out kind of covers that. That if we do not move to Windows Server 2019, how does that impact my 2023 regulatory year-end updates? Basically, Infor will post the Microsoft 2019 compatible updates and it'll be accessible. And then they go on to say, we will stop running 2012 servers internally. Thus, we will never be able to replicate or resolve an issue if you're still on 2012. And they will provide a best effort support for issues determined to be unrelated. So I really can't answer that question. I think Infor would. There's a potential that if you're still on 2012 R2, you may have issues applying the year-end patches. In my opinion, if that was true and something global to all customers, they would probably make a best effort to fix it, but I can't answer to that. But clearly there is a risk here, and they are stating that we don't care what your support compatibility is with Microsoft. We are stopping our support in October. Someone asked, what is the cost? We're looking for an in-place upgrade conversion. Honestly, we don't do them. So we could potentially quote one, but I strongly advise against doing them. And the reality is a lot of that work then gets put on the infrastructure teams of the customer because they're having to actually upgrade the operating system, and we would just come behind and upgrade the Infor components. Usually because of the risk involved with them, we don't bid on those types of projects, and the customer is responsible for it. Someone had asked, does the upgrade to Landmark require the ION grid installation? I answered that. The answer is yes. Does the full suite Infor STS support LS as STS authentication? No. Technically, on paper, if you look at Infor STS, they say they support LDAP bind, but I'm told that's not really supported in a production setting. So if you're using Infor STS, the expectation is that you're connecting to or integrating with a SAML2 identity provider. And generally speaking, when we do that for customers, it's to use Azure AD, Okta, Ping Federate. Those are kind of 3 major platforms. This is a good question. You mentioned a lot about operating systems. With the life extension of Lawson 10, can we expect Lawson Infor to work with future IBM iOS upgrades? At this point, I would say yes. However, that's always due or per whatever's in the compatibility matrix. Why I thought that was such a great question is on the Landmark side of things. When Landmark came out, and really ever since it's been out, Infor has supported 2 operating systems. They've supported Windows Server and they've supported AIX. Most customers are on Windows Server, but there are a few on AIX. Back in 2022, or actually probably in 2021 when they made the announcement, but effective of 2022, Infor basically came out and said, we're dropping support for AIX. Going forward, everyone's expected to be on Windows Server 2019 and SQL 2019. So could they do that with the I series? I guess. Will they? Probably not, but they did do that with Landmark. And so this puts customers who are on the Oracle database platform for Landmark or on AIX in a weird place, in that we actually had a customer who they're upgrading Landmark 11 AIX and Oracle 19C and they ran into an issue. We opened a ticket and Infor said, yep, that's a known issue. Here's how you fix it. And we said, well, you're going to update the product documentation. And they said, no, because we're only supporting new products on Windows Server. So there's these hidden features and bugs that they are supporting, but aren't really documented because it's clear their stance going forward or expectation going forward is that everyone's on Windows Server for Landmark. And they gave quite a bit of notice when they made this update. And they do state that they're still supporting existing customers on other types of deployments for Landmark. But in my mind, it's clear this is the direction they're going. This is their direction their development teams are going. And I would want to be in line with the vendor in terms of how they're testing, building, deploying, supporting their product. There's another question. Will Intellias only assist with part of this project, like setting up Infor OS, STS, and Okta? I would say typically when we come into a project, how do we help customers? So typically when we come in, we help the customer provide guidance and recommendation around sizing, architecture, deployment of new servers. So the types of servers that you need, the operating systems that they'll run, the disk, RAM, CPU, certificate requirements, DNS requirements, kind of all of that system architecture. So that's more of a partnership and a collaboration because ultimately the customer makes those decisions on what they want, but we would provide recommendation and guidance on that. Then the customer is responsible for procuring any required licensing, hardware, infrastructure, networking, providing a VPN, deploying the base server. So we would have expectation as the servers would all be provisioned default per the specs, ready to go. And then our team would come in and actually install all of the products, perform all of the data migrations, and take over everything from there to the point where then the customer's really biggest responsibility is for testing. From a go live perspective, we do the data migration, we install all the environments, we smoke test the environments, just the customers providing the servers, and they're doing the testing. And then we would cover everything else. Can we buy extended support from Infor? Really, that's a question that's better suited for Infor, but I think it's pretty clear from this document that they're not, at least on the 2012 R2 platform, they're not extending support. So I don't think there is any extended support that you can purchase from them on the operating system. But you can always, and I would always recommend reaching out to your Infor representative for validation. I'm just kind of trying to interpret what I read through the knowledge base and have seen. And definitely go reference this KB. Again, all of these, the PowerPoint content, the KB numbers, all those things, we'll send this out, so you don't need to worry about writing them down. But I tried to put some key ones in here so that you go back and pull and reference that from the support site. All right, so with that, I think we got through all of the questions. We are just about over time. So I appreciate everyone taking the time to speak with us today. If there are any follow-up questions, throw my contact information up here. Please don't hesitate to reach out, schedule a call. Chandra, who gave the intro and welcomed everyone on the call, will be reaching out as well to all the attendees with the recording and PowerPoint. Yeah, thanks for attending and hope to talk to you soon.